Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Tom Lepik, my guest on One of a Kind, was born and raised in Iowa City. Tom's varied vocations have included a jockey, a wrestler, a coach, a teacher, a realtor, a business owner, and last but not least, an owner and breeder of racehorses. Attending Hoover, Southeast, and City High, wrestling was his passion. He became the state runner-up in the sport and eventually wrestled for the University of Iowa. Upon graduation, he joined the West High School staff as a teacher of physical education, the head wrestling coach, and assistant football and track coach. During these years of college and teaching and coaching, he raced as a jockey until an accident during a training session forced him into retirement. Following his coaching career, he obtained his real estate license and formed the company known as Lepic. And if that wasn't enough, he's now deeply involved in the horse industry as a breeder and owner. After retiring from West High, Tom Lepik spearheaded a fundraising effort that ultimately led to the 1993 construction of the school's own football facility, Trojan Field. In addition, Tom contributed and paid for the team rooms built next to the football field. Tom and his wife, Polly Lepik, have 3 children, Matt, Natalie, and Carrie. Welcome to One of a Kind.
Thank you very much, Helen.
Your story begins in Iowa City, where you were born in 1953. Let's talk about your first family and their influence on you.
Okay. My parents were fabulous in the fact that back then it was so different. Kids ran around from the time that they woke up in the morning until the time that they went to bed. And my mom and dad were so great at just letting me be a kid. I grew up watching the high school teams. When I got out of elementary school, every day I went to one practice or another, depending on what sport was in session, and just lived at City High School. It was just my biggest passion, being around the high school athletes. I loved watching them compete. I loved watching them train, and ultimately that's what led me to wanting to be an athlete. And every night I'd come home and Mom and Dad would sit down with me and talk about, the things that I saw that day, what I learned, what was really fun for me, and it was so great because they knew that was what I really wanted to do. They knew how important it was, and as I grew older and got a chance to compete myself, they were always there, of course, and I knew pretty early in life that I wanted to be a coach and a teacher. And I just didn't know if I'd have the opportunity, because you need to be successful yourself in order to do that. So that was kind of my drive to hoping that I would be successful, because I wanted to continue that as I went on. And it was because of my mom and dad's encouragement and the drive that I saw from them throughout life that it really helped me get to where I am today.
Well, I know you were an expert salesman or a young boy, that you went door to door, knocking on doors and selling Fanny Farmer candy. And then I read you had all these jobs growing up. You worked, I have to read it because there's so many. You worked hard and managed Wilson Sporting Goods store, taught tennis lessons, ran the baseball facility in City Park, umpired games at night, stocked shelves for Giant Food, all of this, school studies, mascot for the football team, and wrestling. Did you sleep?
Well, I did. I didn't need a whole lot of sleep, because I was pretty energetic. But it was a situation where, I love selling, and I like to be able to buy different things like bats and things like that. And Mom and Dad, they weren't a wealthy family by any means. They got us whatever, but we had 3 children and stuff, and so one day my mom happened to have a Fannie Farmer cookbook at home, and I was looking at it, and I asked her where she got it, and she told me she ordered it. And I looked at the catalog that she ordered it from, and it talked about buying groups and a group of things and selling them. And I said, Mom, do you care if I order some stuff and sell them? She goes, no, go ahead. So I ordered tool kits and little things that you would sell for maybe $1 or $2, and it would cost me 50 cents. And every night, you know, when I was not doing something else, I'd go door to door and knock on the doors, and all the neighbors knew that I'd be coming by with something to sell. And they're all, you know, it was $1, so they bought it. But it was great. I raised a lot of money that way, and I used to go around City High. Probably the biggest form of money for me was finding pop bottles in the bushes, because all the kids drank their pop and then threw their bottles in the bushes, and I would collect those and take them down to Seaton's grocery store for my 3 cents. So it was fun, and then of course in high school we were always having selling contests for different things.
And you probably, and I read that you usually won them.
Yeah,
right?
everybody was, my classmates were disgusted because they didn't have a chance of winning, because I wanted to make sure I won. Yeah, and
this
so,
was all when you were wrestling for City High. You
Right.
went, you were runner-up at state, like I said in the
Right.
introduction. When I know you graduated from high school, and when did you know you wanted to wrestle for Iowa? And you were offered to go to the Naval Academy.
Yeah, I was appointed to the Naval Academy, and when I was a sophomore, I got a letter from the Naval Academy and talking about what the armed forces were all about, and the Naval Academy had an outstanding wrestling program. Ed Perry was their coach. He was a 3-time national champion. His brother was a 3-time national champion. His father was a 3-time national champion, and he started calling me when I was a junior in high school, and it wasn't at that time that I was that great of a wrestler. I did well, but I hadn't placed in state. But the academy looks for what they call well-rounded young men, and I was
potential.
I was involved with so many things. I did well in school, and I was the president of all classes through high school, and they saw all the different things that I did, and that excited them. I went in for and interviewed with the Naval Academy. They flew me to Chicago for a physical, and then it was early spring, my senior year, as I got the appointment by Governor Hughes, I think it was, for the academy, and I just wasn't sure if I wanted to go because of it was a 9-year commitment. And the thing that bothered me the most was I kept asking them, what do you want in return, and basically they want you to be an officer and to make it your career. Well, I still wanted to be a teacher and a coach, and I knew that I could still do that, but it was going to be at least 9 years away, and I just wasn't sure I wanted to wait that long. Then one night I got a phone call from Coach McCuskey at the University of Iowa, and he said, Tom, I want to congratulate you on your appointment to the academy. Are you sure you want? He says, I see that you're not sure you want to go. Why is it that you're unsure? And I talked to him about it, and he said, well, I'd like you to come over and visit with me if you'd like. So I went over to the university and sat down with him, and we had a long talk, and he said, well, I'd really like to give you the opportunity to wrestle at the University of Iowa. And it didn't take very long for me to decide, that I was going to stay at home. And, it was funny because it was mixed emotion for my parents. My mother very much wanted me to go to the academy, and my dad very much wanted me to stay at home. My dad had been in the service, had fought for the Marines in World War II, and knew that there was a chance of, that we could someday go to war again, and you never knew when, and the Vietnam War was going on at that time. And he was more than glad to have me stay in Iowa City. So
McCuskey recruited you.
Yes.
He was there a year, and then you said Kirtlemeyer came in,
Yes.
and then Dan Gable came as an assistant
Right.
coach.
Mm-hmm.
So was Kirtlemeyer your coach all through, your main coach all through?
Yes.
So, and then after you graduated and you did really well at Iowa, you decided to, you wanted to teach, you wanted to coach, and...
Well, it was because of misfortune that I became the coach at West High School. Ken Reed, who was an extremely good friend of mine, of wrestling, and of so many people in Iowa City, just a tremendous person. I had done my student teaching underneath him in my senior year, had a heart attack in school in September in the fall of 1975. At that time, I had just graduated, and I had had a couple offers to teach and coach at small schools, and had turned them down because I was managing Wilson Sporting Goods, and I was still competing in wrestling, and I thought, I'm just going to wait till the right opportunity comes up. Because of the passing of Ken Reed, I applied for the job, not thinking that I could ever get the head coaching job at the age I was in my hometown, but I was fortunate enough that I was named the head coach, and his teaching was also in physical education, which was my major, so everything fell in line for me and worked out great.
So you were around 21, 22 when you started?
I was 22 years old, yes.
22.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this time, I said in the introduction, besides wrestling at Iowa, and then you started teaching, you were a jockey.
Yes.
And what happened to that career?
Well, it was a situation where I was wrestling my senior year in high school, and after one of my matches, a gentleman came up to me and was talking to me about my match, and I thought he was a reporter, and as it turned out, he wasn't. And then he had mentioned he wanted to talk to me about being a jockey. Well, I kind of shut that off because I told him, I said, hey, I'm here to win a state championship, and I don't really want to talk about this right now. Well, between he and a couple other people that I became friends with, Don Rayner, who's one of my greatest friends now in the business, and who I rode for to begin with mostly, and Bud Lenz, who has passed away but was also big in the horse business here in Iowa City. I started as a jockey in 1972. I rode for 72 through 78 and had a great career. I was very successful. Most of my riding was on smaller tracks because back then there weren't any recognized bigger tracks like Prairie Meadows in existence in Iowa. But yet I rode for a lot of very good trainers, and mostly Don Rayner, who's still training today. He had outstanding horses, most of them owned by Bob Thompson, who is the owner of the Lark Supper Club. I rode for Bob a great deal. But in 1978, in May, I was training at Don's farm, and nobody really knows what happened. I came out of the gates, and Don took his eye off me for just a minute. We're just training, and I don't remember a thing. I don't remember many things for a few years after that, but I went off the horse, and
hit your
we
head?
don't know if, yeah. I had very serious head injuries and was knocked out for about 7 days. And
you were unconscious for 7 days?
Yeah, I'd come in and out. I was in the hospital and unconscious, yes, yeah.
Talk about a defining moment in your life.
Yeah, it was pretty nasty, but like I say, it's one of those things that I don't remember at all. And I was just fortunate. My family was there for me at that time, and a few weeks later I tried to go back to school, and that didn't work out. And my mother had to do my grades for me. She was the secretary at Grantwood Elementary School.
Oh.
She took all my books and all the things from school and went through and figured out what grades every kid should have. And the worst part about it was my son was born 2 weeks before that, Matt, our first child, and I don't have much recollection of his early childhood. Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
So, getting back to your career as a coach at West High, you, after 3 years, I read that you were named the Coach of the Year.
I was.
After 3 years of coaching.
Yeah, I was the Mississippi Valley Coach of the Year.
Well, I talked to a former student who wrestled under you, and I said that I was going to interview you, and I said, do you have any questions you want me to ask him? And he said, God, it's a twofold one. First, he asked, who made the most out of what he had when you were coaching, and who was the best wrestler you coached at West High?
Okay. The easiest one is, well, the best wrestler is a tough question because I had two young men who were both state champions, Kurt Ranshaw and David Baird.
Oh,
And
David Baird,
yeah,
yes.
and I had many kids who made the finals but didn't win, and you know, you have a lot of kids that don't even place in state who are just as good as those young men. But you're fortunate, you win some matches sometimes, and it's a sport that 1 point differentiates you from somebody else. But Kurt was the only 3-time state place winner that I coached. He was second as a sophomore, third as a junior, and then as a state champion he was a senior. So you'd have to say he was the most successful. Whether he was the best, I couldn't, you know, it'd be hard to say, because David Baird went on and was the captain of the University of Illinois wrestling team and did extremely well there. And so, you know, I was fortunate to have a lot of young men that did a great job. In terms of who made the most out of themselves, I think as hard a worker and one that maybe didn't have the talent other ones did, a young man named Tom Lepik, worked and worked and worked, ended up wrestling in the University of Iowa team, placed in state his senior year. But you talk about a young man who just knew that he was going to be good. He and in his sophomore year, he was average, but he wrestled so hard and competed so hard and wrestled during the summer and did all those kind of things. And I had a lot of young men like Tom, but Tom I'll always remember how the work habit that he had and how he was determined to be a state champion, even though he wasn't. He ended up having to wrestle a young man in the state tournament his senior year who ended up being a national runner-up for the University of Iowa. And so it wasn't the fact that
competition.
That's exactly right. You know, my senior year, I ended up wrestling a young man named Joe Corso, who ended up being a 2-time Olympian. And it's just, you know, you're fortunate sometimes to be at the right place at the right time. And I wasn't at the right place, the right weight class in my senior year, and lost in the finals and Tom kind of had the same situation. Yeah.
So was it hard to give up coaching and teaching to move into the real estate? How did you move in your next career into the real estate business?
Well, I had
transition?
already started. I started the business after being at West High School. I believe it was 4 years or 3 years, something like that. I started selling real estate part-time. I had a long discussion with Gene Krager. He didn't want anybody to sell for him part-time. And we made a bet. I said, Gene, I can sell so much. I guarantee I'll sell this much part-time, or else you can fire me. And he laughed and said, I'm not going to fire you, but we'll have this bet. Well, the funny part about it was, you know, you teach and coach and you know, so many people talk about, you know, how teachers don't make enough and how many hours they put in. Well, I got my license to sell real estate in July and sold part-time in the evenings and weekends the rest of the year. And that year I made more money selling real estate than I did teaching and coaching sports full-time. So I realized money-wise there was a big difference, and that wasn't important to me because I loved to teach and coach. But what happened was a few years later Gene and I decided that we were going to form the partnership of Lepic Krager. And it was very important to me that if I owned the business that you
give 100%.
Yeah, that I was there in support of all my agents, and you know, it was my job to go out and hire and build a company because, you know, Gene didn't like that aspect. He loved to sell, and he was great at selling. He's a great people person, but didn't like the aspect of going out and hiring and
recruiting.
And so that was kind of my job. And one thing I did tell him that day was that I was going, if the only way I was going to be his partner is if I could hire women, because it was an all-men company when I started. And the reason was Gene's wife had a real estate license, and she wanted to sell, but Gene said, I don't think it'd be good if we sold together. And so Gene said, well, I can't hire any other women unless I hire her, so that's not happening. I said, well, if I'm your partner, I'm going to hire women. And so I called his wife that night, and she said, Tom, no problem. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Good.
So I, after about 3 years, I gave up teaching and went to only teaching half-time. And then after another year, I gave that up and continued to coach, but only coach wrestling. And so it was a slow process during that whole, I think it was 7-year period. I coached and taught for 11 years total, from 75 to 86, but slowly weaned, I guess you'd say, from full-time into part-time, and then not at all. And in 1986, I decided it was time to, I like to have wrestling practice twice a day, a lot of times in the beginning and end of the season, because I thought it was really important. It was from learning from Gable and from everybody else.
Sure.
The harder you work, the more successful you're going to be. And it got to be really tough for me with business and with everything else, and I didn't think it was fair to the kids.
Sure.
And so I didn't tell any of my family, because I knew they'd talk me out of it. So I went to the awards banquet in 1986 and had it all on note cards to make my speech that I was resigning, and started and broke out crying.
Oh.
And handed the note cards to my assistant coach, Randy Rogers. And he goes, "Oh no, if you're going to resign, you're going to do it yourself." And I said, "Randy, I can't do it." And so he read my resignation speech. And everybody learned that day, as well as my family, that was my last day of teaching and coaching. Yeah. It was very tough.
I can imagine. But knowing you move forward, and you probably didn't look back and said,
Well,
this is another challenge, and I'm
Yeah.
going to go for the full-time as a realtor. And you own the business, too, with
Right.
Gene Krager. There's so much in your story, and we'll get to, I want to talk about this next career with the horse racing, and breeding business, but I always ask my guests who or what had a major influence on you.
Oh, so many people did. I think one of the most influential people I ever had was Clyde Bean. He was my head wrestling coach and head football coach and physical education teacher and
why?
what
did he do?
He
How
was
did
just always an inspiration being around him. I admired everything about him, and I loved being at practice. Sometimes practice is the toughest thing of all for any athlete. I love being at practice because I love listening to him and watching him and learn from him, and he was in terms of that part of my life by far the most influential. But as that's when I got younger, Frank Bates, who it's now Bates Field at City High, and I think his name was Coach Holmstrom, Ted Holmstrom. He was the baseball coach, letting me be the mascot on the football team and the bat boy on the baseball team when I was in elementary school. That kind of influence. Sure. If that hadn't happened, who knows? But they took me in and saw that it was such a passion, and they went out of their way. I went to all the away football games on the team bus in the luggage rack on the team bus.
You were in the luggage rack?
They would put me up above, and I'd lay down in the luggage rack.
You were the mascot in the luggage rack.
Yeah, and it was so funny. And I'll never forget, all the rides to all the buses and listening to him speak and everything else, and being in the locker room with the kids. So those type of things were just amazing. And I had so many teachers that I admired that through the years and stuff that made me realize that I wanted to be a teacher, and just too many to name anyone. I wouldn't want to leave any out.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this new career that you're in now, the horse and breeding industry. How is that going? And are you loving it? And,
it's become a major business. It's such a passion. When I quit racing in 1978, I was pretty devastated because I loved being a jockey. Wrestling in high school and wrestling in college, that competitiveness is great, but the excitement of being on a horse, in a horse race, and being sometimes in, I had quite a few falls. Most jockeys do, because you can't worry about injury if you're a jockey. You can't worry about getting hurt. You have to put the horse in the position to win.
What did you weigh as a jockey?
I usually weighed about 115 to 118 pounds.
Is that about typical for a jockey?
It is. It is. And you know, you put yourself in many situations that you know something could happen any time.
Sure.
But the excitement of being on a horse, going that fast, and hoping that there's a little more to get to the finish line first. It's just
the
amazing.
adrenaline rush. It's a rush, isn't it?
There's nothing like being a jockey, and people just, it's too bad people can't go into a booth and get on a racehorse and feel like what it is to be a jockey. There's nothing like it. Well, I missed that when I got done. And I stayed away for a while knowing that it wasn't going to happen anymore. And my family had started in that exact same year. And of course, real estate was getting, busier and busier and busier. Well, it wasn't until 1992 that a classmate came to an open house of mine and walked in, and his name was David Huffman. And he started laughing. He started talking about people that he was had been a horse trainer, and I didn't know that because he lived in Texas. And he started talking about how he had heard about my jockey career and all these things, and would I like to get back into the business? And I said, how's that? And he said, I own racehorses, and I'm done training. Would you like to own a racehorse with me? And he had one in particular that he wanted to know if I wanted to buy part interest in.
This wasn't Spit Curl Diva, was it?
No,
okay.
that's the newest one.
That's the newest one. Okay.
And so I ended up buying it with him. It was just a part-time thing, but the passion and the fun of it all, and he's no longer involved, kept growing and growing. And the first mare that I bought, I foaled the baby out and named it I the Hawkeye, and I needed a trainer. I knew this horse was going to be good. I could tell by his attitude, by his looks, by his conformation, everything about him. And I wanted my trainer, Don Rayner, that I rode for, to be the trainer. Well, he had retired. And so I called him, and I had an equestrian center, and I called him, and I said, Don, this is Tom Lepik. He says, hi, Tom. He goes, I heard you're getting into the horse business. I said, I am. I said, I've got a young foal that I want you to come look at. So he came to the farm, and I brought him there with a purpose, and he didn't know it. And he looked at I the Hawkeye, and he goes, this is the greatest foal I've ever seen. And I said, you really think so? He goes, oh, it's going to be amazing. And I said, yeah, but there's one problem. And he goes, what's that? And I said, I don't have a trainer for it. And I said, and I have 4 other horses I don't have trainers for. And he goes, I'll help you. We'll find somebody. And I said, no, I want you. And he goes, what? I'm retired. I said, I know you are, but it's time that we get back together. And I said, I'm going to give you half of I the Hawkeye for nothing if you will train my horses. And I said, but you got to commit to training, and you can't just train for a year. You've got to commit to training. And he said, Tom, Jean will kill me if I go back to training. And I said,
That's his wife.
I said, Don, I got a feeling she'd be very happy if you, because she knows that's your passion. Well, he called me up an hour later, and he says, I'm in. And I the Hawkeye went on to make 200. He was the first horse to make over $250,000 in Iowa as a quarter horse, and he's in the Hall of Fame now. So he brought Don and I back together, and we still are together every week now in the horse business.
And you have, is it 15 horses?
It varies anywhere from 12 to 20 horses every month, depending on sales. Like last week when I was in Oklahoma, I also was there for a sale and sold 2 horses. But like I have 7 foals this year, and some of those I'll sell next year. So it varies. Right now this year I had 8 quarter horses racing and 3 thoroughbreds that were actually racing on the track.
And you're involved in the organization of your president of the Iowa Quarter Horse Association, and then nationally
I'm the marketing director,
the
subcommittee marketing director of the American Quarter Horse Association. So I'm gone a lot with that type of thing. But
does a family go? Does your wife go?
My wife goes to a lot of the sales, and she'll go to like the national convention and things like that. But when I'm traveling for meetings, no, she's busy here and at home, but it's another family away, because the horse racing industry, you're all a big family, and it's a passion, so you get to know each other very, very well.
And you're loving it.
I am loving it. A few years ago, when my wife and I decided to buy You know, we've been successful in horse racing, but the last couple of years, our success has just been unbelievable. I raised a horse and named it after my wife. I called the filly Here Comes Polly, and she ended up being the champion 2-year-old filly in the state of Iowa, and it's so much fun. It's so much fun to watch her race. I told my wife.
Is she still racing?
Oh yeah.
Here Comes
yeah.
Polly?
She's racing this Saturday night in Erie, Pennsylvania. But I told my wife, I said, I just had a foal. And I said, the breeding is such that it's going to run from behind. And I said, but the breeding is outstanding. I love the baby, and I'm naming it after you. And she goes, it better be good. and she goes, I don't want to lose her named after me. And I said, now you're putting pressure on me. And she goes, what are you going to name it? And I said, I'm going to name it Here Comes Polly, so that when the family's in the grandstands and the announcer's calling the race, he'll go, and here comes Polly. And sure enough, she's become the champion, last year's champion 2-year-old in the state of Iowa, and it's just fabulous. And then
that's awesome.
And then we, 3 years ago, bought a quarter horse named Spit Curl Diva after her 3-year-old year, and she was already a successful racehorse, but the owner hadn't given her the chance of being great. He'd only raced her in Oklahoma, and thought that she had raced pretty hard her 2- and 3-year-old years, and wasn't quite sure what to think of her, how good she'd be after that. Well, I flew to Oklahoma and looked at her and fell in love with her and bought her. She, the next year, we traveled all over the country with her, took her to different tracks, gave her every opportunity that we could, and she ended up being named the world champion quarter horse mare and the world champion age horse. That's any horse 4 years old or older.
Nice.
And then the next year she was named the world champion mare again. And the greatest part about that was we took our family with us when she raced in New Orleans for the national championship for fillies and mares. The whole family flew, all the mom and dad and brothers and kids, and we flew down there, and we just had the greatest time of our lives. You know, I'd never smoked in my life, and it was, when we won, we were all walking down Bourbon Street with a can of beer and a cigar, celebrating Spit Curl Diva's victory. It was one cigar, but I tasted it for 3 days. So
yeah, I bet. Yeah, you're not picking that habit up.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your wife, Polly. How is there a story how you met her? And tell me where your kids are and what they're about.
We originally met in 1971, the year that I graduated high school. She was a junior in high school at Fort Madison. She was a wrestling cheerleader, and I was there wrestling in what was called the Tri-State Freestyle Championship, and getting ready to wrestle in the finals of the tournament, and wrestling somebody who at that time was pretty good. And she walked over to me and tapped me on the shoulder, and she said, "Tom Lepik?" And I said, "Yeah, my name's Polly Flock." And she goes, "I'm a cheerleader here," and I knew a lot of people from Fort Madison, and were friends with the coach and other people, and she goes, "I came here because we heard you were wrestling and heard you're in the finals, and we came to watch you win." And I said, "Well, that's really nice, Polly, but I said, I appreciate you coming over, but I really got to get ready to wrestle this match." And she kept talking. My mom actually came out of the stands and walked down to me and said, "Tom, you better get ready to wrestle." And Polly never forgot that. And so I won the match, and she was the one that actually all the cheerleaders, separated who gets.
Sure.
And she was the one that gave me the medal when on the award stand. Never saw her again for 10 years. We were both married at that time with a child, and went to a Halloween party together. We ended up going to a mutual friend's Halloween party and saw each other. And I said to my wife, I said, "Oh, there's a girl I've got to talk to. Come with me." So we walked over, and I said, "You're Polly, right?" And she goes, "Hi, Tom." She goes, "I heard you're going to be here." And so we talked for a while, and that was it. And then I was coaching football and bringing the kids up from the football field at City High, coaching the West Side team, the sophomore team at the time. And I saw her just like 5 years later against the fence. And I told the other coach, take the kids up. I just want to say hi to this person. I walked over, and I said, "Polly," and she goes, "Hi, Tom, good game." and I said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "I'm the art teacher at City High." and we're painting little hawks on the kids' faces. So that was that, and I didn't see her again. It was about 10 or 11 years later, I get a phone call from a gentleman who wanted to list his house. And I said, okay, and I went to the house and knocked on the door, and Polly answered the door. And at this time, I had been divorced for a year, and knocked on the door, and Polly answered it. And I said, whoa, Polly. And she goes, hi, Tom, I wondered if you knew this was my house. I said, no, I had no idea. And so I said, well, I'll go through and measure the house and do everything and come back tomorrow with my market analysis of the price of the home and that type of thing. Well, I came back the next day and asked her, I said, well, where's your husband? You know, isn't he going to be here for this? And she goes, no, he doesn't live here anymore. We're in the process of getting divorced. So I ended up selling the house, and over the next, couple of years, I think before we even closed, she and I went to lunch and talked about just how good it was to see each other and that type of thing. And we talked about, she asked me what it was like to be single, and
Sure.
Because she was going to be, and we made it a point to maybe every 4 or 5 or 6 months get together for lunch or dinner and just talk about, what we were doing, life, and she'd say to me, are you ever going to get married again? And I said, not a chance. And I said, how about you? And she goes, not a chance. She goes, I'm loving dating, and she was the house mother, the Tri-Delt sorority house, and getting her doctorate in art education and going out dancing and just having the time of her life. And it was maybe after 3 years, that was in 78, and it was in 1991, in 1998, that was when that was. And then in 2001, one day after work, I decided, gosh, I haven't seen Polly in a long, long time, I'm going to call her. So I called information, because I didn't have her number, and said, is there a Polly Flock in the phone book? And they said, yeah. And they gave me the number. So I drove up, and it was the Tri-Delt sorority house. I'm like, whoa, this isn't the right place. So I called her, and she goes, are you at the Tri-Delt sorority house? I said, yeah. She goes, you're at the right place. I'm the house mother. So I picked her up, and we went to RT Grun's, and we were going to have something to eat, and we were sitting there. We had a couple of drinks each, and she turns to me. She says, Polly, Tom, are you dating anybody now? And I said, no. And she goes, why don't we date? And I said, oh, you're kidding me. And she goes, why do you say that? I said, Polly, we're great friends. I said, you really want to do that? And she goes, yeah, I think it'd be really great. So we sat and talked for a while and decided, okay, let's try it. And it lasted one day, because I told her I wanted to take her the next week to watch the Hawkeye race, and my whole family would be there, and how great it'd be for them to meet her. She emailed me that night and said, I can't meet your family already. So I said, okay. And it wasn't like 3 weeks later I called her back, because I thought maybe this needs to take time, and called her back, and she says, why haven't you called me? And we've been together ever since.
That's great. And your children, what are they doing? Are they living?
My son Matt sells real estate with me. My daughter Carrie is the head of Verizon Wireless here in Coralville, Iowa. And Natalie, who's Polly's daughter, who's my stepdaughter, is a speech pathologist in Scottsdale, Arizona. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So,
what is the best part for you of living in this community? What do you like best about Iowa City?
Well, I've always loved Iowa City, because you know everybody, and I've loved watching the transformation of Iowa, Coralville, North Liberty, everything about that, and of course the greatest part is almost my entire family's here. Other than Natalie being out of town, all the family lives here. Mom and Dad, my father just passed away in May, but my mom and dad live here. Polly's mother lives here. All my brothers live here. All my kids live here. My grandkids live here. So
it's family.
It's
you have
family.
grandkids.
I have 5 grandkids. Yeah.
5 grandkids.
Yeah. And so it's so fun to be here, and
I say your cup runneth over.
Well, I made my kids when they're young sign an agreement that they would never leave Iowa City.
Oh, you didn't either.
Oh, I did, jokingly.
No, jokingly.
Jokingly. And
there's
and I don't think they'll ever leave. They love Iowa City the same way. They're family kids, and they're great mothers and fathers, and it's wonderful. But Iowa City is a small community, and I can't go anywhere without knowing everybody. And Polly and I go out at night, and she knows everybody because she was a teacher at City High for 22 years, and where else could we be and have more fun than we have here together? Especially, Polly's been such an inspiration for me because she went back and got her doctorate, and she's so focused. And we're fortunate enough that she retired shortly after we got married, but she's heavily involved with the arts at the University of Iowa and volunteers, and so we. With our two schedules, it's sometimes crazy, but it's fun to see and be around each other and see the things that she gets to do. But it's great going out and knowing everybody that we know.
Well, on that positive note, there's so much more we could talk about that I don't think people know that you work out with the wrestling team and have for years and years and years, and that's why you're in such great shape, and all the other things you've done for our community. And I thank you for being my guest today on One of a Kind.
I really appreciate it, Ellen. Thank you very much.
My guest on One of a Kind has been Tom Lepik, family man, wrestler, jockey, coach, teacher, businessman, horse owner, and breeder. Words used to describe my guest are loyal, hard-working, multi-talented, dynamic, and a ball of fire. Tom Lepik is one of a kind.